Hello, and welcome back to Finding the Right Words. I'm Kevin Mathewson, speaking to you from Brazil. Last time we spoke about timing of translations and dilemmas associated with that, the discrepancy between what the client expects and what realistically we're able to do. I mentioned that I saw Gregory Rabassa read with Julio Cortázar in New York at Barnard College, and I guess it was years ago. And they each read passages from Rayuela, hopscotch in English, where the precision and the integration of the text was so tight. It was extraordinary. And I don't actually remember in detail the passage that Cortázar read, but I remember very clearly the tone in which he read it. And there's an interesting aside here, which is that authors are generally not trained as actors, so when they read, they're not so much making dramatic presentations, but they have a privileged knowledge about how the text is supposed to sound. And a translator guesses at what that's supposed to sound like is, what that natural sound is. And there was a very powerful moment in Julio Cortázar's reading. It was the narrator was meditating on his relationship with La Maga, and he said, "Oh Maga." Obviously not a problem for the translator. That's easy enough to translate, but he brought a dimension to the words that was just very delicate, sad, weary, but with a kind of hope in it at the same time. It was really quite remarkable, and I don't think any other reader could have done that because he was inside it. He knew what it was supposed to sound like. Rabassa's rendering was an echo. It was a tight echo. And it was just a very powerful demonstration that the two of them made that night. As a matter of fact, Rabassa had the privilege of becoming friends with Cortázar, and so they worked closely together. In practice, that's obviously the most desirable arrangement, because there are all kinds of things that nobody knows but the author. It puts me in mind of, there's an interesting tradition of from the beginning of Genesis 2:19. I have to read this. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. There's quite a bit of talk about how Adam is the first poet, and Adam is the first biologist. There's an interesting tradition that Adam is the first translator, and I'll say a little bit about that. Evidently there's no language question here in this reading. The tradition is, I guess it's from the Middle Ages or maybe a little earlier. There's a French writer who talks about it, Hippolyte. It's not Hippolyte Taine. I'm going to say Hippolyte Montjardin, but I don't think that's his name. It doesn't matter. The commentaries are that Adam is on the basis of this relationship and finding the right words for the animals. Adam is the first translator. And whoever came up with this in the Middle Ages or earlier knew something about translating, because the parallel they draw is that the translator's relationship to the author is comparable to Adam's relationship to the Creator. The translator has discretion on interpreting the content, but not discretion on the content itself. And this has the corollary that the translator has to give an accounting of the whole thing. This perhaps like a biologist or a librarian classifying the whole scope, the whole content of the thing. And it means that he has to grapple with the good, the bad, and the ugly. The translator can't say, "Oh, I really don't like this section, so I'm not going to do it." He has to give 100%, or she, account of the every item that exists under the roof of that work, or in Adam's case, under the roof of the creation. So what Adam has to do is to find the right names, find the right words, and he creates a secondary creation. He creates a poetic inventory of all the animals, and that's an interesting analogy to what we do when we translate. We're looking for the right names of these objects, which are the text in the other language. We're looking for the right names to create a kind of poetic inventory of that other text from the other place that's provided by a creator. I'll say a little bit, I think, about why should literary translation be of general interest to all translators? Because a lot of us don't spend much time with literature. As I touched upon a little earlier, it's generally the least paying. It's generally the hardest, the most complex, and the slowest. So there's sort of built-in disincentives in a way. And often it's the most rewarding because of those difficulties. But what it would give any translator of any kind of text is a real serious workout with naturalness. And in a sense, if you always want to make what you translate sound like it was written in your target language, you want to have that degree of naturalness. And it's not for idle reasons. The reason is that if it's not reasonably natural, the reader, the client, the reader, the audience isn't going to accept it. And they're not going to be comfortable with it. So you really do want to make the reader feel at home. And you can't find better training in that struggle for naturalness than in literary translating. So for that reason alone, it's even for translators who aren't doing literary translation, it's a good skill to work on and see how it pays off when working with other kinds of problems, other kinds of texts. My sense, my experience is that it helps a great deal, that the more literature you translate, the less troubled you are wrestling with the problem of naturalness that is really everywhere in translation. Changing gears a little bit, I just wanted to suggest a little something for translators who are new to the field, it's a project I've been trying to get off the ground or trying to implement for quite a while in my own work, and it's called smart deadlines. The idea of smart deadlines is that most of the time, very particularly because of that friction I spoke of earlier between the expectation of the public that translation is automatic and the reality that it's often not automatic. Very often in agency work and commercial translating work, there's a very peremptory assumption of an instantaneous deadline, or the faster the deadline, the better. The faster it's done, the better. And as a matter of common sense, that's simply not true. A little more time makes for a better translation. I think this is almost universally the case. And so I'm very much interested in what you could call client education. When the client's always saying, when do you want it? ASAP, we want it yesterday, we want it immediately. Often that's not a realistic demand. And I think we all have experience with those situations where something really has to be done immediately, and we do it. And that's fine. That's part of the drill. But what about all those times when a little bit of communication with the client could produce a slightly more reasonable situation? I think this is important. I know there are times when I've just killed myself for deadlines when it just would have taken a little bit of better planning, better communication to have a reasonable time to do something, and always with a little more time being able to harmonize the text better, catch mistakes, catch useful alternatives. So if you're starting out with this work, it's just a sort of a suggestion that look for ways to find more reasonable deadlines to do the translation in. There are questions of health. If the stress is constant, that's not good for your health. But there's an aesthetic question here that you're doing more to honor the languages if you give them a little more respect, you give them a little more time. Now in that connection, I found that it's often desirable to work with other translators because they know all these things. There are agencies that are run by capable people and they have, a sympathetic understanding of what the translating involves. But it spares you a whole bunch of customer education if you're working with a translator who knows that you need a reasonable deadline, knows that you need a reasonable rate, knows that prompt payment is preferable, knows all these things, and it creates a more relaxed climate. I'm not saying you can't develop that relationship with others, but in the interest of moving towards sane deadlines, I almost never have unreasonable deadlines working with a translator, an agency run by a translator, and so I'll just qualify this. Yes, there are those times when something has to be done immediately, and it's an all-out sprint, and maybe it ends up with a couple of rough edges, but that has to be delivered, and the deadline is satisfied. That's a reality that happens. But I would guess there's about 80% of the time things could be a little more reasonable, and it would benefit all concerned. So that's just sort of a suggestion about how to set up the work. So we carry on in the tradition of Adam, swimming in primordial knowledge, trying to find the right words to name the things that are brought before us in translation. This concludes another episode of Finding the Right Words. I'm Kevin Mathewson. Best wishes.